G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Just preparing for Sunday the 13th of September 2015's Outsiders, which we hope will be followed by First Dog on the Moon.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. From birds to politics, this morning's guests are Steph Harmon. She's Managing Director of Junta. Terry Barnes, Policy Consultant to former Howard Government Advisor. Jeff Sparrow, writer, editor, commentator. Rather prolific lately, Jeff. You're writing everywhere.
Oh, well, it's a harsh economy out there. You've got to earn a living.
Look, we open our Sunday papers after a very mixed week for the government, but the talk in the papers this morning is all on this.
There are more leadership rumblings within the Liberal Party amid claims a challenge is now inevitable. It comes as a new poll shows the party is facing a 10% swing in next weekend's Canning by-election. One senior Liberal has told News Corp that Tony Abbott's future is done and dusted, claiming Malcolm Turnbull is the future. Some ministers have not ruled out a revolt this week.
Terry Barnes, that's getting fairly dramatic. We've had no shortage of that kind of talk, but it seems fairly pointed at this moment.
Well, certainly it's being driven by something, there's no question. But to say that a leadership spill is imminent, I think is gilding a lily somewhat.
Driven by ambition or reality?
Ambition, speculation, enthusiasm. Perhaps some people are pretty keen to see that result. But having said that, I think a week out from the Canning by-election, when the government has got its future on the line, it's actually very unhelpful for the government, whether it's Tony Abbott as leader or whether an alternative is actually in the wings. It's a real problem for them. If they can't get that message across, what are they going to do?
And Steph Harmon, part of that story is, of course, the polling in Canning, looking at that 10% swing potentially. As Terry says, this isn't helpful, but the reality seems to suggest that there's something of a discontent with the government, even in Western Australia. Steph there.
This kind of thing. And I think if you are listening to a lot of social media, which has been decried by various elements of the press and the government, but if you're listening to it, you can see that that's not just happening in Perth. So it will be really interesting to see how it plays out. I agree. It's been deeply unhelpful. So I can't imagine that particular leak would have come directly from Tony Abbott, but it's certainly going to affect the result, I think.
Jeff Sparrow, what's your sense of all this? I mean, do we want another change in leadership in another major political party in this country? Do we want to go back to what we saw in the Rudd-Gillard?
Well, I don't think it matters very much what we want. I think that's what's happening. And what's particularly fatal for Abbott is, of course, that this was his great promise. It's a stable adults. The adults were going to be in charge. I think who knows whether there's any substance in these current stories. But once this stuff starts, now the stories feed on the stories, and you go into the death spiral that we saw of the Abbott of the Gillard years, and I think that's clearly happening now.
I mean, the story even suggests, Jerry, that the challenge could come this week before Canning. I mean, it seems quite a distinct possibility that something will happen after Canning.
Well, I think Canning is the bar that's been set. What I think some of this leaked speculation is trying to do is raise the bar for Abbott to make it almost impossible for him to pass any test, and I think that is very unfortunate. I mean, we have to look at. I mean, there is always going to be a swing against an incumbent government in a by-election. That's just the reality of incumbency. You're unpopular. Maybe this government's more unpopular in some ways than not. But at the end of the day, they've got to contest this by-election. They've got to win it, and they've got to get on with the job of governing.
It's Steph Harmon. Are we seeing a government here struggling with the new, very quick reality of public life? We saw them through this week. It's a good example, I think, of a week where they sort of seized the initiative and then lost it several times in quick succession.
I like it. This is nothing new for this particular government. I mean, we've been running pretty brutal and hilarious coverage on all of the gaffes that have followed Abbott since he came into power, and obviously it's not particular to the Abbott government either.
How can you be so unkind?
I know. But it does feel like it's just been consistent, and, and it's on speculation has also been consistent, and it's important to remember that these kind of things come in waves, and we don't really know what's going to happen or whether the spill's actually going to happen this time, or it's just, the media loves talking about this stuff.
And it seems, Jeff Sparrow, that much more agile, the conversation now, that much more quick and turning on a dime, that fortunes change in the space of half a day, never mind a week or a month.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think it's anything particular to do with Abbott, except that I do think people are asking themselves, what is the point of this government? I mean, what does it stand for? What are its achievements? What are its policy aims? I mean, the great claim we saw in that 7:30 report is about stopping the boats. All of a sudden now, we're all for refugees. It's good that Syrian refugees have been taken in, and we're left with this situation. If that's now a good thing, which I think it is, what about the Rohingya refugees? What about the Tamils? What about the people fleeing from Afghanistan? What coherence is there now in Australian refugee policy? It seems to me there's none at all.
Which is the problem, isn't it, Terry? I mean, that sense of what does the government stand for is a sense shared, I think, across the political spectrum. It's an issue on the left. It's an issue in conservative Australia as well for different reasons. And the example that Jeff points to there of the refugee switcheroo this week, which is a response to public sentiment, but in direct opposition to the previous held firm belief of the government.
Well, I think it's a bit of a worry in Australian politics generally, not just in terms of Tony Abbott or the coalition, that any moment of principle is seen as a rare thing. One of the problems I think we have, and we've had since 2007, is that we've had successive leaders and successive governments and oppositions for that matter, basically competing for power's sake. And it's really neither Labor or the coalition have really made a strong case in terms of what they do stand for, what their higher values and principles are, and showing how they're prepared to pursue them in government, not just now, but in the future.
I mean, in that sense, it seems to be the only thing that's keeping Abbott afloat is the Labor Party. I mean, if there was any hint that there was a clear alternative, I think this government would be gone.
I wonder if there'd be some in the Labor Party too, looking at Mr. Corbyn's success in the UK and imagining, you seem to assent there, Steph, imagining the possibilities for a Labor Party in this country with conviction.
Oh, I just think that particular victory just shows what a sort of sway in public sentiment can do, and that people are getting really frustrated with conservatism and how it's playing out globally. And if something like, the shocking images that we've been treated to from the Syrian and the European refugee crisis can change a policy that's underpinned the Abbott government's assent and then governance so quickly, it is worrying. It just shows how much can be swayed by what's happening and how few principles seem to be guiding policy.
Terry?
Well, I think we've had Bill Corbyn for the last 2 years, to be quite honest with you, Steph. I mean, effectively, he has been a populist, pushing back against whatever policies the elected government of the day, elected with a large majority in the lower house, has actually put forward simply by going with wherever the wind is blowing. Now, there is a touch of that in the Corbyn push. I mean, yes, he does have principles and he stood up for them and voted against his party 500 times, I understand. But effectively, it's a populist revolt against the politics of the day. Shorten has been doing much the same for the last 2 years, and Labor generally have been doing much the same. If they don't stand for something, why should we look at them as a credible alternative to Abbott or the coalition?
Outsiders here on Sunday Extra, Terry Barnes, Steph Harmon and Jeff Sparrow. And Jeff, that issue of the revised refugee intake, I mean, it seems to me extraordinary that in a civil war which has been going on for 4 years, which has killed 250,000 people, many tens of thousands of those children, that the image of one of those should cause policy to turn on a dime.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think now that there is no coherence to Australian refugee policy at all. I mean, if it's legitimate to take in these new Syrian refugees, why not the people who have been languishing in the various detention centres for so long? I mean, I think what we're seeing now is a government which was forced into taking a humanitarian position by the frankly magnificent response of the Australian people, who really kind of rose to this occasion, but was pushed along kicking and screaming every inch of the way. And basically various members of the government and people associated with tried to poison the well as much as possible, introducing a note of sectarianism into this discussion that, somehow Christian refugees were somehow better than Sunni refugees, even though Sunnis are the people being targeted by the Assad regime. So yes, I think there is now an opportunity and indeed an obligation for Australians to fundamentally think refugee policy because it's incoherent.
Steph, does consistency trump compassion?
I hope not, but I do think that I think that in this case there was very little that the Abbott government could do, and I'm very interested to see, or I'd be interested to see whether or not this strong stance would have been taken if it hadn't lit up social media the way it had, those particular images. I think that they yeah, I agree with Jeff. They were pushed into compassion.
It does say something about our time, though, doesn't it, Terry? It's the image, it's the photo, it's the thing which captures that sort of media imagination, which changes our view, not the reality of a long-standing and bloody conflict.
Well, that's true, but I actually was thinking about it the other day, and the way I see it is that image was very much like Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin in America in the 1850s. Back then, slavery was tolerated. It was actually passive acceptance of great evil. But that event, that book, changed everything. That actually led to people getting active, wanting to overthrow this evil. I think nothing has changed. This is exactly the same now. Of course, it's now digital, it's now imagery, it's now social media, but the principle is exactly basically the same as it was.
It's just a matter of pace and spread. And just very, we end the week with an instance of virality of Mr. Dutton's quirky sense of humour being displayed for all to hear.
You know, I really don't think this incident was particularly funny. I mean, climate denialism is, you know, when you pretend climate change isn't happening, but this is climate sadism when you know that it's happening and you think it's funny. And also, I mean, I have a question for, you know, the Liberal supporters here or elsewhere. What exactly does the reference to Cape York time mean?
Yeah.
We have an immigration minister who's referring to Cape York time now. What does that mean?
Well, there's a very good response to that from a community leader in the Cape who refers to it as the sort of soft bigotry of diminished expectation.
Well, yes. So the three stooges there in that meeting were linking people in Cape York with Pacific Islanders. What do they both have in common? Cape York time is apparently equivalent to PNG time. What's that a reference to?
Terry, it's pretty unhelpful. And apart from anything else, shows an extraordinary lack of situational awareness by professional politicians.
Well, boom microphone awareness, I think, is more like it. But I think we have to keep this in perspective. It was an unfortunate attempt at witticism.
Do you agree it was racist?
I don't think Peter Dutton is racist. I don't think the comment was intended to be racist.
Well, what does Cape York time mean then?
Well, I don't have a clue, to be honest, because I haven't been to Cape York. But then again, we make jokes about New York time, don't we? And the way that a New York minute works. So I think we've got to keep it in perspective. But I think the other point about all of this is that when you're under the pump continually, every little blemish, every little issue gets magnified. This has been magnified, and it's now rebounding on the government in a way that perhaps it shouldn't in terms of the actual cause of the offence.
And see, I don't see it as a trivial thing like that. I mean, you have to remember this was in a context where Pacific leaders had just had climate action voted down by the Australian and New Zealand government, voted the 2% rise down, and then Australia jokes about it.
And Steph, it was made to Steph for, you know, it was on video, it was on audio, it was the perfect modern moment.
It was, and it did, you know, it went viral for a reason, and I think that reason comes down to, firstly, you know, I don't necessarily, I can't say whether or not Peter Dutton is a racist, but there is certainly implied or casual racism in the Cape York time reference. But on top of that, it's all about context. If it was someone who'd been campaigning to reduce emissions, campaigning to really increase Australia's contribution to helping the environment, made that joke, it would be darkly humorous, and it would have been a strong and powerful joke if it was made in the right context. But the context of this particular joke in this moment was so tone deaf that it just really struck a chord.
Well, the other thing about it, I think, is it plays to the stereotype in terms of the Tony Abbott and the government. Those who oppose both of them, basically this ticks their boxes, and I think, again, it gives ammunition to the government's opponents and enemies. It was a real lapse, a real error of judgment. I think they regret it. I'm sure as hell think they regret it. But they have to now show that they are above all that.
Hang.
Okay, well, approaching the upload limit. I will return with the dag end and hopefully first moon dog.